The New York Giants need a new quarterback in 2025. That much we know. But how stable is the offense for one? That and more coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. It is appreciated. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we all know that the Giants are going to need a new quarterback in 2025. And we'll talk later on in a future episode about the best options, draft, free agency. I'm going to wait until we get into the new year to talk about that. But what I want to talk about now is, are the Giants set up for a new quarterback? And I'll explain what I mean in just a bit when I get to that section. Then in segment 2, the Giants need some changes. We all can agree on that. So I'm going to look at some basic organizational philosophies of head coach Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, things that if they are back next year, they need to reconsider how they are doing football business. So those are going to be the other topics we'll talk about. Again, welcome on in. Let's talk about the New York Giants offense. Now, those of you who follow me and read me know that I always like to say that before you bring in a new quarterback into an organization, whether it be a rookie, and especially if it's a rookie or a draft pick, you want to make sure that the surrounding pieces on offense are stable. All right. You want to make sure you have an offensive line. You want to make sure you have decent receivers. You want to make sure you have a good tight end. You want to make sure you have a good running game. And you want to make sure you have a good offensive system. And I have said, when it had to come to Daniel Jones, now the former quarterback, the Giants just never did that. They kind of, built the offense up on the fly, pushed Daniel into being ready before he actually was ready. And we all know how that worked out. So I thought I would go through the Giants roster as it stands now and just kind of look at all those elements and how ready they are, or how close I think they are to being ready for a potentially new quarterback. Now, with a rookie quarterback, obviously you want things a little bit more stable, because at least with a veteran has been there, done that, and can sometimes adjust based on, using his experience. So I'm going to look at it from the perspective of a rookie quarterback. And if the Giants are built up enough to where if they do select a rookie quarterback next April, can that guy succeed? All right, so let's start off with the receiver group. All right, they've got a number one receiver, Malik Neighbors. We can all agree that he's going to be a part of the team next year and a very big part of the team. But let me ask you this, guys. Who's receiver 2? All right, right now, you would think it's Wan'Dale Robinson, but Wan'Dale Robinson, not really used as a deep threat. He has the lowest lowest air yards per pass target of all the receivers. His average target rate is also amongst the lowest. So you figure the Giants are going to likely move on from Darius Slayton, who right now you would think would be that guy. He's not going to be here next year, I don't think. So you think, okay, well, what about Jalen Hyatt? Well, Jalen Hyatt can't seem to get any pass targets. He's like an afterthought this year after, looking semi-decent last year. So the Giants, as far as the receiver core goes, they really could use another deep threat. If it's not going to be Jalen Hyatt, and I sit here and I'm not 100% sure why Jalen Hyatt has been buried the way he has. If it's not going to be him, then it's got to be somebody else because Malik Neighbors, as good as he is, he can't do it alone. And as I have said before, once teams start doubling him up, if these other guys underneath are not winning their one-on-ones, you got a problem. If you don't have another guy that you can send deep, in which you now force the opposing defense to pick their poison, you got a problem. So definitely the Giants could use another receiver, whether it be a veteran or a draft pick. All right, tight end. I do believe the Giants are good at tight end. They're going to have Theo Johnson back. He is unfortunately lost for the season with that foot injury that he suffered against Dallas, but he will be back next year. Daniel Bellinger should be on the roster next year. And then it's just a matter of, who the third tight end is going to be if they carry a third tight end. So I think they're going to be fine there. They just need to get those guys more involved. So that actually, I'm kind of, talking a little bit about play calling here, but they need to get the tight end, I think, a little bit more involved in the passing game, particularly down in the red zone where those guys should be able to really, create mismatches. All right. Running game, I think they're going to be okay there. I like Tyrone Tracy. I think he's, been underrated somewhat. I'm not saying that he is as good as Saquon Barkley right now, but I did a statistical comparison between the Eagles running backs and the Giants running backs. And if you were to stack them up and rate them according to different stats, Tyrone Tracy would be number 2 right behind Saquon in terms of yards, in terms of yards after contact, even in terms of receiving yardage. So Tyrone Tracy up and coming. I think that running game is solid. They should have Devin Singletary back again next year, I would think. Eric Gray, I'm not really sure what his long-term future is here, but I think the running game should be okay. Offensive line, the starters, or I should say the line that was meant to start, not horrible. Okay, if you get a healthy Andrew Thomas and John Runyon Jr., you get Jermaine Illuminor, who, I think will probably stay at right tackle next year. Move Evan Neal to right guard. I mean, I know there are people out there who say, oh, he's not a guard. Folks, he's not a tackle. I mean, how many more times do you have to see this guy fumble around with his footwork and his balance and see him on the bottom of a pile on the ground when he should be staying to his feet? You move him inside the guard, and maybe you mitigate some of those issues. You move him inside the guard. Now maybe you don't have to put as much help on that right side. Now maybe you can send the tight ends out into pass routes and whatnot. So I think if the Giants go with a line of Thomas, maybe move Illuminor to left guard where he was supposed to originally play, John Michael Schmitz at center, who, by the way, I think still needs to be better than what he has been this year. He's been a little better than his rookie season, but can be better. Evan Neal at right guard, Illuminor at right tackle. I think that's a solid line. Just get some depth in here because that's where they're really lacking. And we all know injuries pop up. You can't afford to have a situation where now all of a sudden, God forbid, Andrew Thomas goes down again next year. And now what do you do at left tackle? All right. Play calling. I would like to see Brian Daboll give up the play calling. And again, I know I have said in the past that, oh, it's a good thing because he's the architect of that offense. But folks, going back and looking at it, the Giants had pretty decent success with Mike Kafka calling the plays. Even though last year the team didn't look as good on offense, how much of that was a result of all the injuries? How much of that was a result of the revolving door at quarterback? I just feel like Daboll, some of his game plans, some of his play calls have just left me perplexed. And, I don't know that he's going to give it up next year, but I would say, just kind of jumping ahead a little bit, actually, that would be something I'd like to see. Keep the same system, but maybe designate somebody else to do the play calling because it didn't work this year. Okay. So, all that being said, is the Giants offense set up for a new quarterback? I would say probably about 80%. Yes, it's 80% of the way there. Few more tweaks here and there. Like I said, a receiver, more offensive line depth, maybe a change in the play caller. And I think they'll get there. I think it'll be a better situation for whoever is the next quarterback as opposed to when Daniel Jones took over back in game week 3 of 2019. Okay, coming up next, we're going to take a look at changes. Part 1. What do I want to see Brian Daboll, if he is back next year, what do I want to see different for next year? We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Locked On Giant fans, if you're like me, your holiday shopping list is far from being complete. And if you need something a little different, I've got the perfect gift for the passionate sports fan in your life. IceShaker bottles are officially licensed with the NFL, NHL, NBA, NCAA, and MLB, and they make the ideal gift. Created by and used by the Gronkowski brothers, IceShakers have changed the game with workout bottles made of kitchen-grade stainless steel that won't absorb odor like plastic bottles. This is the gift you've been looking for. Order your team-branded bottles today at iceshaker.com and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get 25% off your order. IceShakers, show your support for your teams with the best branded workout bottles on the market. IceShakers. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Life gets so busy sometimes that we forget to say thank you to the people in our lives that make it so much better. But there is another person we don't thank enough, ourselves. It's sometimes hard to remind ourselves that we are trying our best to make sense of everything. And in this crazy world, that's just not always easy. That's where therapy can help with learning to pace yourself and to cope with all that life throws at you. And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Fill out a questionnaire to get assigned to a licensed therapist. And if you find your assigned therapist isn't a match, switch at any time for no additional charge. Don't skip therapy day. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm going to have Mike Jones, national insider, writer for The Athletic. He's going to join me. We're going to have on Thursday, crossover Thursday with Ross Jackson. I am so excited about that. I absolutely love Ross. He is just the best. And tell me that that man doesn't have the most incredible smile that you have ever seen when you watch that show. He's just such a ray of sunshine. So I'm looking forward to that show as well. And I'm also working on maybe getting you another guest. I've reached out to somebody who I think you will recognize. Hopefully that person will say yes. So once I have any kind of confirmation, I'll let you know who that person is. All right. In this segment, assuming that Brian Daboll is back next year as head coach, what changes does he need to make? Now, let me just start off by saying I do not think it is a slam dunk that Brian Daboll is back. I think it's likely that he is back. I think I would be surprised if he is not back. That said, he's on shaky ground. I think we can all agree on that. There are things that if he is back, he really, needs to do some soul searching and determine if what he has done in the past, as far as preparing this team every week, is the way to go. Now, in the last section, I mentioned play calling. All right. Now, again, this is an instance where I'm going to admit I was wrong. I thought Daboll calling the plays would help the offense. I thought it would be a good transition, considering that, Mike Kafka, the offensive coordinator, probably will not be on this team next year. He will probably go and take on another assignment. I think his contract is up after this year. So I figured in terms of continuity, let Daboll start it this year and then, he could continue the year after that, and the year after that, or for however long he was head coach. I've changed my mind on that, folks. The play calling by Daboll at times has just been absolutely perplexing. It's been head scratching and just not effective. And the numbers don't lie, the film doesn't lie. So if I'm him, and I don't think he does this, by the way, because obviously the man enjoys doing it. He enjoys calling plays and whatnot. And it's his decision. I understand that. But I would consider turning that role over to another assistant. Now, if he were to do that, I think the next obvious person in line, if Kafka is not here, as I suspect will be the case, is Shea Tierney. I do not necessarily want to see Shea Tierney as the play caller either. No offense to Shea Tierney, but I don't believe he has ever called offensive plays at any coaching level. And I think at this point, you probably want to get somebody in who's maybe a little bit more experienced in calling plays. Okay? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, well, Kafka came in and he had never called plays. No, he hadn't, but he was an NFL quarterback, which to me counts for something. That said, I don't think Daboll will go that route. I can't see him bringing in, say, for example, a Pat Shurmur. I know somebody suggested to me, oh, if they draft Shedeur Sanders, they should look to hire Pat Shurmur. I don't see that happening. So, it's going to be Daboll's system if he is back. And he's going to want somebody who can run it, and he's going to want to have a hand in it. I think, though, for him to call the plays, he's just got to do a better job. I mean, again, some of the play calling, and I'll give you some examples. There have been times when they have played teams with bad run defenses. And what do? Instead of run the ball down the throat of the team, they pass the ball. So I just feel like there are times that Daboll is too quick to give up on the run, even when the game is close. And I'm not sure that all the time he leans into the strength of the team on any given week. So, again, the results speak for themselves. The point scoring, now, they'll point to, well, the turnovers, they'll point to the execution, which is on the players. I don't want to, hear it's all on the players. It's not all on the players. Some of that's on the play calling and on the coaching. And Daboll, to his credit, does take, he does say, hey, it starts with me. I got to do a better job. Yeah, okay. So do it already. We know you got to do a better job. Do it. And if that means giving up the play calling, then I think you got to think about it. Okay, now, the other thing that drives me nuts with Daboll, and I've spoken about this before, but I'll say it again, is how he gets this team ready in the summertime. This whole philosophy of, well, we have a joint practice with the Lions, so we're getting good work in those 2 days, and I don't have to play the starters because they got in good work. My goodness, if that is the philosophy that he has, he really needs to rethink it. And I'll tell you why. There's 2 reasons. Number one, those joint practices, as I have said so many times, are in a controlled environment. The quarterback does not have to worry about getting hit. The players don't tackle. Well, folks, what has been amongst the Giants' biggest problems this season? The quarterback not knowing how much time he has to throw the ball, and therefore maybe taking a sack that he shouldn't, and the tackling. Okay, so please don't tell me, oh, we're getting quality reps in and we don't have to play the starters. Okay, look, I know some of you are saying, well, why risk them for injuries? You get them ready. A player can get injured in practice. A player can get injured in preseason. A player can get injured in the regular season. So to use that as an excuse, in my opinion, it doesn't fly. And here's the other thing. Given the way Daboll has done it over the last couple of years, it's like we see the starters get most of their work in the second preseason game and then not really anything in the third preseason game. So now they're going almost a month in between games, and they come out and they look flat. We saw it last year in the blowout loss to Dallas. We saw it again this year in the blowout loss to Minnesota. All right. How many more years do you need to see this to know that maybe you should consider giving your starters some work in the final preseason game, even if it's just for a quarter, even if it's just for a couple of series, get them some work. Okay. I think that's a big thing that they need to consider moving forward on the coaching level. But again, it's Daboll's call. If he's back, we'll see. Now, some teams don't give their starters any work in the preseason. Most of those teams, I would venture to guess, they're established teams. Kansas City, I think, gave their starters some work late in the preseason. Okay, and like I said, some teams don't do it, and that's fine. But when if you're going to sit there and you're going to say, well, this is a new year, a new team, blah, 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 shouldn't you give them some work, especially if you have newcomers? Never made sense to me. But again, not my call, just my recommendation for what it's worth. So we'll see. All right, coming up next, let's talk about Joe Schoen and the changes he needs to make if he is retained. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey, Giant fans, if you're looking for those hard-to-get tickets to shows, concerts, and sporting events, look no further than to Game Time. Game Time makes finding the tickets you want faster and easier than ever and offers seats at competitive prices. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time's Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. I've used Game Time in the past to catch area concerts, and I've simply been amazed at the offerings and the competitive pricing that they have. Game Time takes the guesswork out of ticket buying, so you are left with the seats you want at reasonable prices. You'll get clear images of your seat views, and you'll also get event cancellation protection. And if you find tickets elsewhere in the same section and row for less, Game Time will give you 110% of the difference. So go on and get the tickets you want. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And please, if you're watching on YouTube, consider subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to like the video, click the little notification bell. That helps with everything, as well as if you are listening to us on any audio platform, consider subscribing and give us a review. I appreciate constructive feedback on things that you want to see, things that you want to hear, guests that you want me to get. I do this for you guys, and I appreciate you guys and gals. And so any feedback, constructive feedback is certainly welcome. All right, in this section, if Joe Schoen is back, what does he need to do differently? All right, let me start off by saying I do believe Joe Schoen is going to be back. I think he is on much more solid ground than Brian Daboll. I would be surprised if he gets fired. I know there's still 5 weeks left and things could change, obviously, but I just have a feeling he's back. Ownership will probably want to have some patience with this process. That said, I wouldn't go planning, like a 10-year anniversary for Schoen at this point. Okay, so if Schoen is back, where does he need to change? We're going to start off with the biggest thing, valuing players. While I don't necessarily disagree with letting Saquon Barkley walk, what I did not like about that whole scenario was that Schoen basically said, you know what, Saquon, you go out, test the market, find out what your value is, and come back to us. I have never really liked that approach by a GM. You either know the value of your player or you don't. And the fact that Shane was like, well, I don't want to piss him off by giving him an offer that insults him. This is business. People are going to get ticked off. Not everybody's going to be happy. Okay. Everybody always seems to want more than what they think, what they're actually worth. It's just a fact of life. And to basically, say to a guy, go out, let the market determine your value and then come back to us. I did not like that approach at all. Okay. Now, the other thing that really kind of grinds my gears about how Joe Schoen has built the roster is this practice of not trading players who are not in the long-term plans of the team. And I'm going to go back to this past trade deadline when he held on to Azeez Ojulari and Darius Slayton. Now, I don't recall off the top of my head if Slayton drew trade offers. I know Ojulari did. But Shane didn't want to give the guy away for nothing. I believe he was looking to get at least a 4th-round pick for Azeez Ojulari. I understand where he was coming from, but here's where I have a problem with the philosophy. Even if Ojulari next year goes and signs with another team, there is no guarantee that you're going to get a comp pick for him. Okay? And even if you do get a comp pick for him, you're not going to be able to use that comp pick until 2026. So if you know that, okay, you know what? We're not going to re-sign this guy because he's injured all the time or he's not a fit or he's this or that. Wouldn't it make sense if you got at least an offer to say, okay, you know what? Maybe we don't get the 4th-round pick, but if we get a 5th or a 6th, that's better than getting nothing. This way, you're assured you have additional draft capital, especially knowing that you have to build up your roster next year, especially knowing that you may have to trade around the board. So wouldn't it make sense to make sure you get as many draft assets as possible? I would think it does. Right now, I think the Giants are only projected to get one comp pick, and I think it's a 4th rounder if I'm not mistaken. And I can't remember I think it's for Xavier McKinney, I think. Right? And I can't remember now if they're going to get one for Ben Bredesen. I'd have to check on that for you, but I know they're projected to get at least one. But again, the more draft picks, the better, especially when you're finishing with another top 5 placement in the draft order, which it looks like the Giants are going to do. So I just don't understand, this stubbornness of, well, I'm not giving him away because I want what I want. It's like if you go to sell a car, all right? A few years ago, my husband and I went to sell a car that we had. And my husband figured it would be worth a certain amount of money. And it turns out it wasn't. So we had to take less just to move it. Because if we hadn't really taken less, and we had, entertained multiple offers for the car, it was either take less for it or be stuck with it and have to junk it and get nothing for it. So sometimes, you can't drive a hard bargain, especially when everybody knows that, oh, you know what? You're going to probably trade that. You're probably not going to re-sign that guy anyway at the end of the year. So why should I give you a high draft pick when I can get away with giving you a low draft pick? There has to be a give and take. And I just wish Shane would maybe take that into consideration, because that's probably one of the biggest faults he has in the 3 years that he's been GM. It's just not valuing players properly. We could talk about, letting Xavier McKinney go. I don't fault him for that. $17 million a year for a safety, that's kind of high. So I don't fault him for that. We could talk about some of the draft decisions he's made, such as not addressing the pit this past year. No defensive linemen, no offensive linemen. Well, you know what? Have the offensive linemen and defensive linemen that he's drafted, have they exactly set the world on fire? Nope. So You wonder, okay, is that why the team hired Chris Snee to help with drafting or scouting offensive linemen? I would think so. Defensive linemen, we'll just have to see, how that plays out. But if you're building a team from the inside out, which is the right way to do it, and you're not addressing the trenches, that's a problem. So overall, look, here's what I'll say about Joe Schoen. I think for the most part, he has a solid foundation. I like this year's draft class. Tyrone Tracy, Malik Neighbors, Tyler Nubin, Theo Johnson, Darius Muasso, Drew Phillips. It's a solid class. And that class is going to be part of the foundation moving forward. Brian Burns is part of the foundation. Dexter Lawrence, Andrew Thomas, John Michael Schmitz, Bobby Okereke. They're all part of the foundation. There are enough pieces in this rubble of a season that you can assemble and build upon. But some of the valuation of the players and some of the philosophies, they just need to improve. Now, I know what's going to happen at the end of the year when Shane and Daboll speak. They're going to say, we're going to sit down and we're going to look at everything. Okay, great. But how much are you really going to change, knowing that this is going to be 2 years in a row that your season was over well before Thanksgiving? That's the question. And that's the answer I want to see if those two are indeed back next year. Okay, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, make sure you tune in tomorrow. Mike Jones of The Athletic, one of their national insiders, he's going to be with me on the program, and we'll talk a little bit more about the futures of the franchise. Of course, Joe Schoen, Brian Daboll, and where the Giants go from here after the season. So hopefully you will check that out. Until then, have a great night, and I will talk to you tomorrow.